Using blending modes for lighting and shading is amazing, but sometimes you can get caught in a trap of simply slapping these down and not giving it much care and thought. Sometimes you can get better results and learn more by choosing the light and shadow colors yourself and painting them in directly. It forces you to think more about color and value, and the way light and shadow appear on an object, such as with ambient occlusion and bounce light. If you don't understand these terms, then this video will be a huge help to you, and if you do, you will hopefully also get a lot out of the practice I'm about to make you do. These concepts are something I've been spending more time recently trying to master myself, so I've made these sort of practice levels to help both myself and you. These levels consist of 12 3D shape images, ranging in difficulty to paint. Our first shape is a classic sphere. You've probably drawn or painted a sphere like this, so you should be a pro already. Before we paint it, let's break it down. The base shadow color is right here. It appears bluish because the shadow color is always influenced by the surroundings, and the background here is blue. If not for a thing called bounce light, the whole shadow area would be this bluish color, but as you can see, the shadow shifts to a more green hue over here. This is because the light is hitting the green ground and bouncing up onto the sphere. Bounce light is extremely important for making an object feel like it belongs in a space, and it really brings a painting to life. And although it is a light, it tends to be most or only visible in shadowed areas, being just a little brighter than the base shadow color. In addition to bounce light, we also have an example of ambient occlusion here. As we've already explored, there is still light and shadow, coming from the ground and sky in this case. This is also called ambient light because it comes from the ambience. Without it, shadows would be solid black. However, some spots and shadows are harder for this ambient light to reach. At the very bottom of the ball, the value isn't pure black, but close. The ambient light is mostly occluded from this area because it's hidden from the blue sky, and because of the cast shadow on the ground, there's no green to bounce into it. That was a lot to process, but once you understand, we can apply this to more complicated shapes. A lot of people are great at applying these ideas to basic shapes like a sphere, but when they get to more complicated real-life things, they forget all about bounce light and ambient occlusion. That's why we're going to transition into more complicated, real-world subjects gradually. But first, let's paint the sphere. Ideally, you should have a hard and soft round brush that increases in opacity when you apply more pressure with your stylus. If your device doesn't have pressure sensitivity, don't give up. Just use whatever brush is comfortable for you. When you paint, resist the urge to use the eyedropper tool to get the colors from the reference. Try your best to find the color on your own. Once you've finished, you can now check the accuracy of your colors. Use the eyedropper tool on the reference, put down a blob of the color next to where it goes on your painting to see how close you got, and be sure to open up your color picker to see what it looks like there as well. That's it. I'll be much more brief explaining the next ones, since you already now know the fundamentals. Our second reference is the same ball, only the light source is brighter. The shadow area is smaller, and most of the ambient light is green bounce light from the ground. Third up is still a sphere, but with different colors. Like before, notice that the shadow is green because of the green sky, and there is orange bounce light in the shadow as well. And here is the same colors with a cube. With cubes, each side is mostly the same color. Notice how there is more orange bounce light on this side than the other, because the cast shadow on the ground causes there to be less orange here to bounce up. Okay, we're 1/3 of the way through. That was level 1, understanding lighting and shading basics. Level 2 focuses on how multiple shapes interact with one another. First up is the same scene we looked at before, but with a dark blue sphere next to the cube. Notice the blue bounce light hitting the cube here. Second is 3 spheres merged together. This is a good example of hard and soft edges on shadows. Here the shadow edge is hard, and here it is a soft, gradual transition. Knowing which to use is pretty much just intuition, and one key element of amazing shading is using both types of shadow edges. Here's the same scene, but the shapes are reflective. There isn't much to be reflected here other than the ground surface, but if you look closely, you can see a cone I left there off camera for possible later use, and didn't realize it would show up here. And finally, in this level is a small shape in the cast shadow of a larger shape. Most of the yellow bounce light from the ground hits this area because it's angled toward the ground, and you can also clearly see here that shadow edges can start out hard and soften as they go out. Moving on to level 3, we're going to now try some more complex and real-life based shapes. Here is a weird spiraling S shape. Sometimes, the object color will bleed into the cast shadow a bit, which you can see here. Also, another example of hard shadow edges and soft shadow edges. This one is a bit tricky because of how many sides there are, but there is a lot to learn here. For the first time, we have a second light source. This shape is backlit with a blue light. For these final 2 references, we're using complex, real-life things. You're probably more likely to paint something like this than a simple cube or sphere. This fox creature has very organic round shapes, and in contrast, this house is very angular. Both are made up of shapes we've already used and follow the same light and shadow rules. And that's it. I suppose I'll let you leave without painting any of these, but I'll be so proud of anyone who does, and you'll learn a lot.